So thank you again for attending. My name is Jerry Lin. I'm a principal security architect at a large networking company. You can probably figure that one out. Very large networking company. My career has been built on security. And what I'm going to show you today is something we've been working on. Our team at Cisco been working on reference architecture for about a year and a half. Right? We've gone through multiple iterations, and hopefully this is something that you can value and take away and do something with it, and perhaps even come back and share here. So let's get rolling here. But first of all, disclaimer, I don't work for RSA. What you're seeing here is just based on personal experience, the data that I've collected, I'm sharing with you. My statements, my opinions does not represent that of RSA or any co-sponsors. So take it as you will, that this is just best practice sharing. Okay, so I got to get the disclaimer out of the way here. And our agenda today, I'm going to talk about security architecture, why it's important. I'm going to get through how the security reference architecture compares to other frameworks out there. Okay, I presented this, the reference architecture that we put together earlier in Europe of the year, and a bunch of Europeans came to me at the end and asked me about all these different frameworks I'm going to cover later on here. I'm like, how does it compare? Are you doing something different? So I'll talk more about that, but it's been going around the world talking about it, getting lots of feedback, and then any of your feedback at the end of this as well is greatly welcome for us to make this better together, okay? And then so with the reference architecture, goal is to show you what it is, what we put together, what are the use cases, what you can do with it, okay? And then, of course, like RSA's instructions, I can't leave here without giving you some homework, some stuff to do here. So I'm going to give you some homework and something that's actionable here. And then we'll summarize here. So my objectives with the architecture is to have you understand the value of having an architecture on the why, right? And then in terms of security, if you guys are all in security, it's about mapping business outcomes to risks, right? And you have to identify the risk, do the gap analysis, and bring that to light for the executives so they understand what they're investing in here. And then with the architecture, it's not meant to solve every single use case, everything under the sun, right? And we designed it by addressing the top issues. And here at RSA, one of the top issues is about XDR as an example. The top issue that talked about the keynote I saw on Tuesday was about zero trust, and talk about SSE or Security Services Edge or SASE. All these are top conversations that's been announced, and different vendors talk about it. So we'll talk about that in the reference architecture. And then, my goal is to have you take away something here, go back and build your own architecture, and maybe come back next year. Maybe you'll be here on stage sharing what you've learned with the rest of the industry. That is the goal here. Okay? So I don't have to tell you, in terms of security, this is just setting the stage here, right? It was very easy. Years and years ago, when I first joined networking, over 25 years ago, securing me on the network was easy. I had one way into the network. There was a router or switch or firewall or filter, something, anything in path will block my traffic, perimeter deny, it's easy. But today, absolutely, that has changed 100%, right? I mean, at any one point, I have 4 or 5 devices on me connected to the internet. I demand access to information anywhere, anytime, any device. That is the challenge with an InfoSec. And so there's so many different ways of connecting and protecting your data. And with that said, we've been doing a lot of defense in depth, right? We at Cisco have done this. I've seen a lot of my peers in the industry have done the same thing of, okay, let's build a strategy to help you protect your network by doing layered defense or defense in depth. And so an example would be something like, like you built a big wall, fortress around your protected assets. You have a big firewall or big door with a big lock in the front, and you have windows to make sure it's all locked up. But of course, you got bad guys coming into the front door, knocking at your door. You got Trojans coming into the side windows. You got Pegasus there flying, coming down from above when you're not looking. All aspects getting into your network, right? And this is really how 0 days gets exploited nowadays. Like you leave something open on that one application or that one user, and the bad guy comes in. They find it, and then they exploit it. Right? That's the goal we're dealing with here. And of course, we try to do some internal segmentation of, hey, I take my crown jewels, put some wall around it, put it in a high tower to protect it in case the front door gets breached. That's their defense in depth layer. So is that the right design? Should we continue to go forward with that? So that is a hard question, right? So which kind of led us to believe, like, well, are we doing this correctly? What should we be doing differently? Now, I'm going to blame RSA. They invited me here to talk. I'm going to say, look, they brought hundreds of vendors here, right? And talk about web security, cloud security, endpoint security, email security, IoT security, whatever, all security things. This is the architecture that you and me, and maybe if you're consulting to your customers as well, or clients, this is what we have to work with. This is the architecture that RSA or the rest of the industry has put together for us, right? What this really means is that you, the end user, and me, we have to figure it out. How do we stitch it all together? Do you just throw more money at this and a specific category if you feel you're weak on endpoint? I don't know. Do you just buy more products? That is not the end goal, right? I've spoken with many CIOs, executive CISOs, and they've all said, look, I'm trying to consolidate. Going to RSA is great. We educate ourselves about best practices sharing, but for me to continue to buy more products, it's not helping at all. So anyway, so this is meant to be a little joke, okay? It's just lots of stuff out there from a industry offering perspective, and we, the end user, have to sort it out. So that's the architecture. What is the outcome? You're all probably going, show me the architecture, show me the architecture. We're going to get there. The outcome of the architecture is, well, what is it? Well, number one, once we build this architecture, is to strengthen communications. Right? I've been doing security for a long time. It's to strengthen communications between me, security, the end users, and executive management or sponsors. That is the number one thing. And even at Cisco, when we rolled out Zero Trust, it's not me, it's not the Cisco IT guy saying, hey, we're going to roll out extra authentication, right? I mean, that person's going to get flamed instantaneously. It's the executives coming down to say that we are doing this for the right business reasons. Please participate, please help us make it all better, right? You move as one direction. So number one is absolutely strengthen the communication there. And the other piece is the business outcomes. I mentioned earlier, risks. It's our job as information security professionals to identify those risks and make sure management understands that. And sometimes it's about, well, you assign a risk and making sure they understand it, and now it's helping management understand. Do I do something and get a result, or is it better to not even do anything? And many times, not doing anything is worse than actually doing something, right? Understanding the risk. So you got to point that out to them, and have some examples to show you in a few more slides here. And then a little bit of fun, a little bit about bragging rights, right? To helping you build your team, confidence. Having a security architecture that your team understands. Everyone is contributing to it. Everybody understands moving to the same goal. You're teaching, you're collaborating. Helps you build confidence. I've talked to clients. They said, yep, we built a security architecture, and now when my CISO or whoever calls me, executive picks up the phone, calls me and go, can we do this? Can we expand in this new market? Can we acquire somebody? Yes, they're confident about that. The team is confident. So it's helping you march in the same direction. And last is this funky math of it's going to completely nullify my engineering degree of this 1 + 1 is greater than 3. Right? So it's a weird math is that the architecture is more than a sum of its parts. That's what it means. And you guys probably heard this many times before. Every dollar that you put into it, it's not a dollar out. Right? It's hopefully $10 out in terms of revenue for you, or tenfold in terms of scalability, what you can scale your network to. So that is the goal from a business outcome perspective here, okay? Now, as I mentioned, management. Management needs to be involved in all of this. So who cares about the architecture? Well, security operations, SOC, usually they like it, right? These are the guys doing the work. Architects like myself or InfoSec groups, they all like security architecture, right? This is our roadmap, but it's to bubble that up even one level higher. get it up to executive management, making sure they understand why security architecture, right? Even our CEO has come out in the public and says, look, security is the number one priority within our company. We want to build security into the product, into our solutions, the stuff that we do. It's a message coming from executive management. And they need to understand what an architecture really is. So they can understand as they transform their business, I'm going to acquire somebody, I want to grow 30% in this new market. What do they need to do? Are they ready? Right? So it's part of an education process for us to move that up here. And so, but how do we do that? Well, we have to create multiple versions, and I'll show you in a second here. Now, to do that, in terms of business outcomes, I told you on the reference architecture, defining risks, okay? And risk for every outcome. So if you've done your CISSP rating or certification like I did many, many years ago, I think I did it like in the early 2000s, right? I was studying about how do you calculate risk applicable to a specific outcome. And there's different ways of doing it. There's a quantitative analysis or qualitative analysis. And a quantitative one's simple. I remember sitting down with my customers at least 15 years ago and going, we installed a server that's $50,000, and let's put some services on here. What are the losses or factors that could impact all of this? Like, for example, risk is equal to threat. Threat meaning it's malware or a disgruntled employee or a hacker or a natural disaster, things that you can't control, multiplied by vulnerability. And vulnerability is just, hey, it's an exploit, something that's a flaw in the asset you're trying to protect. And in information security, we commonly map that to things like CVEs, right, from a MITRE ATT&CK framework. We assign a label, some details around it, give it an asset, a risk value, and then that's how we weight it against other CVEs. And then multiply by impact. How bad is it if it happens in our network? So that's the general formula. Is way outside of the scope here, and I'm probably not qualified to teach this anymore since it's been many, many years. But there's lots of videos, lots of education courses out there to help you calculate risk, okay? Now, I'll say that I did that 15 plus years ago, and I saw that with the industry, but really that has changed, completely changed. People don't, or companies that I work with and talk to don't really follow that anymore. We move more towards a qualitative analysis model. That means now, instead of targeting a specific group and trying to calculate this risk, we're targeting different groups within the organization, including executive management. We sit down with them and says, look, let's do a qualitative analysis of these are the scales from very high to very low, red to green, et cetera, and then give me your estimated advice or estimate of what the risk is going to be. So we take inputs from different groups and write them down and plot them out in a chart. And you can see here in the chart as an example of, hey, what's the probability of an attack happening on the left-hand side here, the vertical scale here, and then what is the impact of that event happening? Is it really high? If it's really high, it's a high number, it's in the red. So if you add those numbers together, you obviously want to get out of the red, right? If it's a good chance of happening, very high impact, that is bad for my business. So you want to take anything that you have in the red or in any of the red zone and try to apply techniques to mitigate that risk down towards the green if possible. So that's the general guideline of going through the organization and plotting this out and mapping it to a customer here. So from a security reference architecture perspective, I call it the SRA, it's about pointing out the specific top of mind use cases, right? That's why I said it's not meant to solve every single use case. It's the top of mind here we're talking about here at RSA. And so I listed some examples out to you like SASE, for SASE for Secure Hybrid Worker, right? That's a use case. I'm pretty sure 99.999% of all of us have been living that for the last couple of years. We've all been working remote, okay? So what does that mean from a risk perspective? Well, there's different levels of risk. From an IT admin risk, right, for intellectual property protection, like, yeah, I provide some sort of mechanism for the user, for a secure worker, a remote worker. Well, there's a chance they're going to download malware because they're at home. There's a chance that because they're distracted by their kids, there's a new Netflix series that got released at lunchtime, so the guy or girl on lunch is watching Netflix, right? You do all kinds of things that distract you from work, and so there's a chance of loss of data. It happens. So there's a risk value kind of associated with that. Versus, or even if you ask the executives, well, should we do secure hybrid worker? Well, as an executive, I should do something to allow my employees to do work, but what if I don't? The risk is even greater, right? Because I'm gonna lose that top talent to a competitor because they can't work from home. My daughter works for a large web company, starts with the letter A, and when the company announced that there's a return to office policy, 3 days a week, she said, oh my God, 40,000 employees protested. They signed a petition, sent it back to the CEO, says, nah, I'm not doing that. That's a business risk from an executive perspective. If they don't do secure hybrid work, you're gonna lose your top talent. So these are the numbers that you, or if I'm working with you, I ask my clients to plot it out and put it in a column, and we sort out the numbers at the end of the day to figure out what we need to do here. The other cases are secure edge or a zero trust, right? Zero trust meaning users connecting to private data across multi-cloud, users connecting to public data across multi-cloud. A bunch of risks I listed out there. I'll mention it in the interest of time here, but something you can look at it and figure out what you can do to mitigate these risks or calculate them at least. And then here's just another example. I was talking to other clients, and he said, oh, what about this RMM model? It's just another website. This is a pretty popular one, risk maturity model that you can go to help you calculate risk. And they have their own, it's sort of the same red grain chart thing, but they have different factors that they calculate, all right, to assess what are the risks in your environment and what to do about it, right? And a lot of it talks about is executive management on board with your security policy? Are they talking about it every single quarter? Are they doing something about it? Are they being reactive or proactive, right? So it's all part of the calculation there for risk calculation. Okay, so da-da right here. This is a snapshot. I see some people waking up already. I didn't know I was putting you to sleep. Some people are waking up here. So this is a snapshot of the security reference architecture that we put together. Our team, again, it's about a 1.5 year effort here, right? And we've gone through multiple iterations. And it's okay, you don't need to take a picture yet. I go through it in more detail coming up. There's a little QR code you can scan as well. But there's a lot of stuff here, right? And it covers threat intelligence as an example. It's the top layer. And there's security operations. Again, I walked around in a bunch of booths here at the exhibit, our RSA, and lots of vendors out there about XDR, and it's important. So fortunately for us, that when we put this together, XDR is important. Back then, we didn't call it XDR, we called it security operations or security operations toolset. It's the same thing, and there's lots of features that are listed here. People in the back probably can't see because the letters are too small, but lots of capabilities here. Followed by, there's a user module, and there's Zero Trust SASE on there. There's the network access, et cetera, right? So I'm going to fast forward here that, really, it's like a little treasure map here, right? If you don't use it strategically, you're going to find junk. And we all want to end up at the bottom right-hand side here, that focus on the right business outcomes right now and leverage the capabilities of the security reference architecture, okay? Now, I told you earlier, I presented this in Europe earlier in the year, and a bunch of people were asking me, how does it compare? And it turns out, as I answer more and more questions, that a lot of the Europeans, and I'm not trying to make fun of the Europeans, just the crowd, the audience at the time, they invested a lot in industry framework like SAPSA, right? If you know what SAPSA is another security architecture framework, or TOGAF. There's more links, I'll talk more about it. Or NIST. NIST is also very popular. I think most of you guys, if not all of them, should be following NIST as well. It's a very useful one. Or our CIS controls and many others, right? There are lots of them out there. It is the security reference architecture we put together meant to replace that, right? And the answer is no, it is not. My goal, at least our goal, is to sort of, I'm focusing on outcomes. That's why, look, I showed you the picture, even though we didn't go through in details on how to identify workflows and things like that. It's about outcomes, not the process itself, right? I can get to an outcome a little bit faster than you going through the existing industry framework. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't continue to apply TOGAF and follow SAPSA. It's out there. If you're using it, Even at Cisco, we use a lot of the COBIT across our enterprise architecture for framework. We follow it still. It's just that this is a best practice, I guess, data that I put together for you to consume with your architecture going forward here, right? So it's focusing on outcomes, not the process here. So also just a little review of SAPSA, if you don't know what it is. Well, how many have engaged or used SAPSA in your networks? So it's okay, so it's about a little bit less than half. If you don't know what it is, it's another, the last two letters, SA in SAPSA stands for security architecture. It's focused on and reference security architecture. There's tons of details out there about what SAPSA is. It's a framework for developing an architecture based on risk. It's risk-driven, okay? And then the problem, or not the problem, I strike that one when I said not the problem. The process involved is that it takes a long time here. It takes a long time to go through all of this, okay? And there's so many different layers. There's a contextual layer, a conceptual layer, logical layer, just to go through the process. That's why I meant it takes a long time. And SAPSA is great, but it relies on other frameworks like COBIT, like which we use. So, and now if you examine COBIT, COBIT has principles like, hey, getting your key stakeholders together. Now we're getting somewhere, right? We're rolling up our sleeves and getting something done. Applying a framework that applies end to end. Applying a framework that can be shared by everybody and separating governance from management, et cetera. So there's a lot more details that gets down into how you actually implement a security architecture from a process perspective, and it's got its own charts. Okay, so COBIT is out there, it's very popular, being consumed as well here. And TOGAF is another one out there. It's an earlier one than SAPSA. They're up to version 10 now. If you just Google it, there's a whole series of processes you can follow about building an architecture framework. And TOGAF is about enterprise architecture framework. So one component is security, and then the rest of it is everything else. So it's a big process, and you can see this big wheel with lots of components. There's a lot of stuff to do, right? It just takes time to get there. So if you're already pursuing this, continue to do so. There's certifications. I know there's a lot of employers that when they hire people, they want somebody who's certified in TOGAF as an example, right? Who has some experience. So I highly recommend it. So, but still, leverage the architectures to help you get to an outcome a little faster in your job here. CIS controls. I have customers going, hey, what about CIS controls? And if you have done or follow CIS controls, it's a list of all these things. And then even their paper, the latest version will say, it's not about the list. If you follow every single control items, am I done? Do I have a security architecture? No. It's about addressing symptoms, in my opinion, from what I see. It's just a list of things about, hey, software asset inventory, cyber hygiene in terms of updating software. Am I doing penetration testing? What about incident response management, et cetera? These are all processes that you should check. Everyone should be following, but does that help you build an architecture? No, not really, but it complements it for you. Okay, so it's something that's measurable, okay, that you can do here. Here's a favorite one out there, CISA or NIST in terms of zero trust. Right? And zero trust is big here at RSA. Zero trust framework published by NIST talks about identity, talks about devices, talks about the network, applications, and data. Right? And all that, these 5 pillars is supported by governance, automation, orchestration, visibility, all of that. And that is absolutely music to my ears because all of these are components right there in the security reference architecture that we put together. When we put it together, we sort of brainstorm, like, what are we building here? What do we call it? Our terms were exactly the same as NIST here. We didn't call it identity, we call it user. But it really is the same principle here. So in my opinion, the reference architecture that we publish here is very well aligned with NIST, okay? And then NIST, however, NIST, if you read their paper, 800-207, go download it and read it. They tell you how to build a zero trust architecture. And it's very cool. It has a data layer as well as a control plane. And the control plane is influenced by a bunch of factors on the right-hand side, right? So really the control plane is, hey, I have a policy decision point. That's the main engine And this main engine, it varies by organization because of these factors on the right-hand side with threat intelligence, logs that you're sending into it, data access policy, SIM system, et cetera. It varies by organization. But that's okay. At least you have a policy engine that dictates the policy down to the data plane for the users, right? Untrusted accessing intellectual property has to go through a policy enforcement point. That is the architecture. But is this enough to help you put a diagram together, pull an architecture together to help you communicate this across your organization? It's pretty good, but not quite there, right? So that's why we took our diagram and expanded further into what it looks like here, but we're adopting the same policy here. I'm a big fan of the military. I was never in the military, but I know that they use industrial grade or military grade high level stuff. So in security, the more high quality, the better it is. So even in DISA here for the military, when you talk about zero trust framework, look, they got users, they got data, they got devices, workloads, visibility. These are all the modules in alignment with the architecture. So I'm like, hey, more music to my ears because we built the right model here. And you can download this on your own time here. So this is it. This is the architecture that we put together, and there are lots of layers, okay? Usually I spend about 30 minutes talking to customers on what it is. What is the architecture? How does it work? The workflows. But in terms of time, I'll talk about what it is. I want to highlight what your takeaway, right? So takeaway from this. So one of the things is the 1 + 1 > 3 thing, right? What I was telling you about. It's that funky math. For example, threat intelligence. Threat intelligence should be built into every single architecture. Why? Because when you invest $1 into threat intelligence, that propagates throughout. That $1 is 10x in returns, as an example. It's not about one-to-one. It should be built in. Same thing with the next layer down in terms of security operations. Here at RSA, call it XDR. XDR takes in combination of network telemetry, everything that you invested in the past, or today still, takes endpoint telemetry, aggregate them together, allows you to do threat hunting and visibility and analytics and all of that. All this threat intelligence is feeding down to the console view, if you will, from the security operations, followed by the next 3 layers, okay, of users, network, cloud, as well as data on the bottom here. Okay. Earlier I said we have to communicate this to management, to others, right? So this is a technical view. I love it because I can spend easily hours and hours talking to my customers, my clients on how do I build a zero trust secure remote worker workflow. I can use these capabilities within this diagram and plot it out for them. Right? You can do a lot. But if I have to upscale this, right, because you want executive management to be in and on this. So we built a slightly different version. Not as busy, not as many icons, so the executives, or at least the financial people, are like, oh my God, you're going to ask me to spend billions of dollars to buy everything under the sun, right? That is not the goal of the architecture. Is all right, you got to buy some stuff, obviously, but we're going to put things together and make them talk to each other. So this is a higher level. We up-leveled it. So if you were to deliver the security reference architecture to your coworkers, to your executive management, something will go something like this, right? Hey, look, the reference architecture is designed multiple layers here. The greens are user. Hey, it's all about the users accessing data through the network, whether it be a cloud or on-prem, and then you got the workload on the bottom. Easy. And then you got the 2 layers on top, and I'll walk through it. Well, the first layer is analytics. We built analytics into our security reference architecture. You got to say that. We built it into our reference architecture. And that threat analytics has ingesting signals, has comprehensive visibility, has actionable intelligence. That means if Bob, working at home today in San Jose, he downloads a piece of malware, the rest of our team in Europe, the rest of the world, the network knows about that instantaneously and informs every point on the network, hey, that thing is bad, nobody can download that. That's the threat intelligence sharing piece that is built into the architecture. That's what you need to communicate to the executives. And then you're moving on down. Okay, you have that piece, so now your network is live. It's real time. Move it down into, okay, I just talked about Bob downloading malware. Well, that's about user security. Well, what is that? Well, it's zero trust. It's all over the news. It's SASE. It's all over the news. How are we protecting users? Well, there's a whole bunch of capability listed here like VPN and cloud manage and antivirus and MDNs and host firewalls and all that stuff is listed there. To the right of that, there's also about user behavior. We shouldn't be asking users to log in by username passwords anymore, right? We know that is a huge source of problems today. We should be moving towards like passwordless, biometrics, finger scanning, retina scanning, whatever, things to make authentication even more secure, okay? And we're doing monitoring of devices that we should be looking at we shouldn't just be looking at users, but we should be looking at the devices, right? I should not be able to bring my wife's iPad, launch it, and log into my company network using my password and get access data. That is a no-no. We have to make sure that device has been registered, the user has been authenticated, multi-layers if you have to, through risk authentication, and then you get granted some access layer. These are all the conversations you need to have to explain to the executives that this is why it's needed here. And then email, user experience. I'm the dumbest email guy because email just kind of works, right? Email blocks spam and phishing. It just works for me. So email experience in terms of phishing attempts, DLP, all that should be part of the user experience. The user should not have to think about how to securely connect to their data. That is the goal, right? That is the goal of the architecture here. So that will solve the zero trust, at least the beginning of the zero trust or SASE conversation, followed by, okay, you secure the user. Now what? Well, where is the user going? Well, like I said earlier, we've been all working remote the last couple of years. Well, most likely we all have been going to the cloud. That means they need to have a security stack in the cloud addressing, controlling that user's data in path there. So that means everything we've done traditionally, firewall, IPS, content filtering, malware, encryption, all that should be moved to the cloud. It should be available in a stack. That's why that box exists, right? It's all capabilities. And TLS is a huge one that you've got to do TLS, and maybe some applications don't even support TLS. So what do you do about that? All things to consider here. Then if you're not, if you do go back to the office, like we're slowly returning back to the office, we're meeting in person. So that means you're probably back at headquarters or a regional hub somewhere, put you right in the center here of managed location. And that means, hey, if you're back in the office, everything we've done in the past, authentication, firewall, IPS, again, web filtering, encryption, whatever, all that still applies. Nothing has been lost, right, since we've gone through this pandemic era here. Or if you, in financials, if you're in a banking branch or in healthcare, in a clinic for a hospital, the SD-WAN, the SSE module still applies, right? That means you're in the branch, you're there being monitored by the network, and with SD-WAN, everybody wants to do direct internet access, DIA. So intelligent application routing should be part of the capabilities there. IPsec and segmentation, all that is part of the security stack. And then we can't forget IoT from a IoT or OT perspective, right? Because even though most IoT or OT spaces are supposed to be air-gapped, I had a customer says, oh, let me show you my policy I created for my IoT space, right? This is for a utility company. And I said, wait a minute, you're sitting in a carpeted space at your desk, and you say it's air-gapped, but how are you connecting to that air-gapped network? So he's showing me stuff. I'm like, so it's not really air-gapped. It's still connected. So that means the policy that you're creating should be propagated. Your network visibility should be able to include IoT from a segmentation and visibility, and even profiling of devices. That's even more important. So it's all part of the security stack there. And then the last layer, well, not the last layer, is the workload, right? It's users accessing in the cloud, users going through on-prem, then accessing data. That's the data, that's the intellectual property, right? And it comes in multiple form factors. Bare metal, it could be a VM instance in a cloud, bubbling up to containers, microservices, if you will, or even up to the application code itself. All the capability listed there, like antivirus, application discovery, all that applies because you need to help your customers create that zero trust or that SASE policy based on these capabilities. And a common one that we don't talk about is looking at code security, right? We look at a device accessing data, who they are, what device it is, and where they're going to. That's great, but what about the actual data itself, right? If that application is making a TLS 1.0 call to another library, that's a problem, that's a vulnerability, that's a Day0 exploit, right? So your policy can't contain that if it doesn't have visibility at the application level. So these are all things to think about at the application or the intellectual property side here. So all of this should report up to the blue thing at the top about visibility, automation, and orchestration. And again, that's the XDR piece. That's the security operations side of it. Okay, everything reports up to it, and that's endpoints, the network visibility, network meaning cloud even. Okay, cloud, everybody has all migrated to the cloud, and even at Cisco, I can easily spin up an AWS EC2 instance or VPC within a matter of seconds. And I've done this last year accidentally. I spun up a VPC, and if you guys work with, you'll know, right? There's a default policy of only allow SSH and port 443 or something like that to get access to your VPC. And you know what I did? I was like, well, I'm just setting it up as a test environment. No, I don't want to do that. I want to do a permit IP any. I left it open for one night. Next day, I was already getting a message from Cisco IT saying, hey, that's not permitted. You need to change your policy or we're going to shut you down, right? So that's important here to be able to monitor even cloud instance as an example as part of your XDR, okay? So does that make sense? From a communication, right? We're going from technical and up-leveling it to your peers, to executives, through examples on why security reference architecture matters. So the next step for you to do is really this. You have the reference architecture, now what? Well, okay, let's dive a little deeper into making sure you're following some best practices. Look at your workflows in terms of user to private data, employees, contractor, guests, et cetera. Right? Define the use cases. And we have examples on our website that show you that, hey, here's an example of an employee on a trusted device going through the network, accessing a public SaaS applications. And we start looking at capabilities. There's no products, right? The goal is not to talk about products, it's about capabilities. Do I have antivirus? Do I have authentication? Do I have DNS security? Do I have web security? Do I have MDM? Do I have host firewall on the end user side versus if I go through SD-WAN, do I have a whole stack of security services in the middle there? Go through those capabilities and put a check or a green mark on the capabilities that you have, and that'll clearly help you to identify what you're missing, okay? So there's the link down there. You can look at a bunch of examples that we published. Or other use cases like, what about a remote employee accessing a private application? The concept is exactly the same. Just look at the capabilities, map out the greens, and identify the red, so that helps you to plot out the gap analysis there. Now, once you've done that with your team, right, we've done that with our team, okay, let's test it. Let it test it. We've all gone through it and go, yep, we've done this, all the green capabilities. Now what? All right, let's test it. In my use case of an employee accessing a private application from a remote location as an example, can it stand the test of a hacker coming in, or a disgruntled employee, or BYOD, or data exfiltration, or I can't remember, malware, and a bunch of things out there. We put that out there for you already. So go through the test. Just test it. Walk through the conversation of, is my use case, my communication secure? Then if it is, great. It's a low risk score, you're on the right track, right? But if you don't test this, you don't know if you built it correctly, right? Everybody has to be in on this. That's the general process that we go through, or at least I go through with my customers and clients here. So let's summarize here. What we talked about so far here. The value of the architecture, right? The value of the architecture is important here. The 1 + 1 is greater than 3. Every dollar you put in, every technology you put in has to yield something greater than just a single-digit return. If it's not worth the squeeze here. And also risk management, right? It's our job as information security to point out the risks, to our management in terms of the use cases that you're trying to address. Right? We bring that out to them. And then SOC from a fast response perspective, that's more important than ever. More important than ever, because things will happen. Some things were going to happen on a network, such as even an employee losing a laptop. I was in Barcelona a couple years ago. I was in the lobby checking out of the hotel on one of my peers. Hey, bye, see you later, Bob. See you at the airport. You walked out 20 minutes earlier, came back within a few minutes, all a little flustered, and I was like, what happened? He got mugged. So he got mugged. I don't know if anything was stolen, but at least his bag was stolen. So what do? We have to pick up the phone, call our IT department, and open an incident saying, like, employee laptop, probably sensitive data on there was lost. So now they have to go through procedures. So having a SOC is important because you have to define the right processes to respond to these things that will happen that's out of your control. That's important. So from a monitoring or incident response or SOC analyst, our goal is to make sure that the tier 1 analyst has all the right tools. They're not logging into a console every single day at 15 or 20 different consoles and trying to react, right? That is not the goal of the SOC, is to have an efficient SOC to be able to pull it all together, correlate it, hopefully leveraging AI that's being built, as the RSA keynote says, and then we're going to make it easier for the SOC analyst. And then standardize on a platform, right? Everything that you're building in, you should demand better, meaning that better have an API. That better have a quality API for me to build data on top of it, or build something else on top of it. And that is the trend we're seeing, that our customers, my clients, my customers are saying, hey, do you have an API for that? If it's not, don't even talk to me, because I have already operationalized a process, right, doing DevOps and things like that. I want to make these API calls into these platforms that you want to integrate into my solution. So if I really have to summarize for everything I talked about today, right, these are the takeaways of why having a security reference architecture matters. It's number 1, business enabler based on risk management. Identify the risk for your executives, right? So again, I mentioned sometimes it's worse not to do anything about a risk that you identify, right? Doing nothing is worse than doing something about that. That's number 1 here. Number 2 is about compliance. In the reference architecture, we are very well aligned. The thing that I publish here, very well aligned to NIST as an example, right? So you can be confident that, yep, this is not something that Jerry put together. You know, I was bored watching Netflix or something. No, this is something that we vetted through a year and a half, multiple cycles, and gone through lots of review process, and is really standing on its own, doing pretty well here. Interoperability is about connecting disparate systems, right? I've talked to customers that said, I invested all my money in Splunk already, or we invested a lot of money in Splunk. And Splunk is a great tool for aggregating data from endpoint solutions and network solutions and blah, blah, all kinds of stuff. That's great, but make sure whatever you're building, or at least for this platform, XDR platform as an example, can also pull in data from Splunk, right? Whatever you're plugging into the network should be able to integrate, right? Demand better here. If not, then look at somebody else here. Business scalability. This architecture will scale. This architecture will scale in terms of zero trust. If you go from zero trust or secure remote worker of 10 employees to 10,000, it should scale because the functionalities, it's not about the product, it's about the functionalities and the scalability. We have it built into the architecture, right? And we can talk more about that if you have any specific use cases. And last is the efficient SOC, right? Having that response, Security Operations Center, be able to respond to threat in action, it's extremely important. Okay? It's extremely important to make faster time of detect and response there. So what you should do here, I'll summarize, it's just a summary slide. So immediately when you go home, you should be able to plot out your workflows. Pick 1 or 2 or 3, the top 3 that you know about, and go, did we do the right thing? Did we implement the right capability to secure that communication? And draw it out, right? Collaborate with your peers and draw it out, and go through the workflow. And you can take some of our examples. One of my peers, Albra, is here, and her team did a lot of work in terms of setting these templates already on the website. If you guys want to follow our guide, we're happy to help you guys, but all this has to be drawn out, okay? And then 90 days, right, after you go home and do this, 90 days, start thinking about this. Reference architecture. Engage your executive management if you haven't already done so. Get them involved in the process on the value of the architecture. And then start creating an architecture. You can follow what we publish and modify it for your own, right? Your network might look a little different and because of different verticals that you're in, and that's fine. Create one for a technical version that you and your peers can work on, and build the up-level one, as I showed you as an example, for management, right? Because they also need to communicate that to the board, as an example, or to their executive peers on why they need to do what they need from a risk management perspective for business outcomes. And then gaps. Identifying the gaps, right, based on risk, that's important, right, in information security because that helps us drive budget. Right, that helps us drive budget. It's about a conversation to go into the executive and goes, if you want to do this, this is what we have to buy. This is what we have to expand on. If you don't, the consequences are far worse. Right? You got to point that out to them. And then map future requirements. Obviously, if there's big expansion coming, acquisition coming, it certainly will change your architecture a little bit. So just keep that in mind there. And then 6 months from now, right, hopefully you build this into a process that continue to engage leadership. Make architecture part of your standard planning process. I used to sit in meetings with my customers on a weekly basis talking about what's working, what's not working, just very tactical stuff, right? An architecture should be part of that business or that meeting process now. Like, have we built the right architecture? Are we moving towards the same goal? That needs to be built in here. Same thing with implementation. Just because I can draw some icons and go through some cool, fancy workflow doesn't mean that it's done. Can it be implemented, right? And this is actually where the CIS controls comes into play here, very complementary, is that in the CIS controls that it has to be feasible, deployable, and it has to be measurable in terms of outcomes. So think about it, like if I want to deploy this design, can it be implemented in a reasonable time frame? So something to think about that. And then align your architecture with partners, obviously. If you guys are doing partner sharing, data, collaboration, making sure your partners are aligned to your architecture so they know what you're doing, so there are no surprises. And then for reassess business requirements going forward with architectures. So with that said, I hope I was able to convey to you the objectives I wanted to set here, right? Understanding the value of their architectures, that 1 + 1 is greater than 3 type of thing. Mapping business architectures, the framework, right? Rest assured, if you have your certification from SAPSA and TOGAF, this is not going to replace what you have here. It's just complementary here. Highlight the use cases. What's top of mind? Zero Trust is the easy one. Very, very easy one. And within Zero Trust, it's 4 or 5, 6 or 7 use cases they can flesh out. Or SASE, or XDR, or network security, whatever it is for your environment here. And then, if you found this really successful, great, build an architecture. Maybe you'll be back here next year sharing with the rest of us, right? And hopefully that's what the goal here with the RSA is best practices and collaboration here. So with that said, thank you for your time. I hope you found it useful.